Welcome back to the deep dive. I've always been kind of fascinated by what makes people pick, and today we're diving headfirst into the world of psychology to answer just that.
Oh, yeah.
You've brought us some pretty incredible sources covering intelligence, personality, and development, all those like fundamental building blocks of who we are.
It really is like getting a backstage pass to the human experience, isn't it? We'll be exploring how all these concepts intertwine, and honestly, I think you'll find some truly mind-blowing research along the way.
I am so ready for my mind to be blown.
Okay, great.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is psychology? I know the word gets tossed around a lot, but simply psychology, one of the sources that you gave us, gives us a pretty solid definition.
Yeah, it defines psychology as the scientific study of the human mind and behavior.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Psychology's reach goes way beyond just therapy. Did you know it even pops up in fields like criminal profiling and designing like clever interventions that help people kick bad habits like smoking?
No way.
Yeah.
That's so cool. It really shows you how understanding the mind can be
Yeah.
applied to practically every aspect of life. Now, simply psychology also talks about this idea of the two disciplines of psychology. It's like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. Back in the 50s, a psychologist named Lee Cronbach pointed out that there's the experimental side,
Huh?
which hunts for those universal laws of behavior in a lab setting.
Right.
Then there's the side that focuses on what makes each of us unique, diving into things like intelligence and personality.
It's like one side is searching for the rule book of the human mind, while the other side is celebrating all the different ways that people can uh, interpret and express those rules.
That's a great way to put it.
Makes you wonder, which discipline would you say speaks to you more?
Honestly, both are so crucial. Understanding those universal laws gives us like a solid foundation.
Right.
But exploring individual differences is what truly brings the human experience to life, all its quirks and complexities.
Love that. Okay, so let's zoom in on some of those key approaches within psychology.
Mhm.
You mentioned behaviorism earlier. For those of us who need a refresher, what's the gist?
So, behaviorism kind of took the psychology world by storm in the early 20th century. It zeroes in on the power of learning and experience in shaping our behavior, particularly through the lens of conditioning.
Conditioning. Does that ring a bell for anyone? Pavlov's dogs, anyone.
Precisely. Pavlov's experiment is like a classic example of classical conditioning.
Right.
He paired that ringing bell with food,
Hmm.
and eventually the dog started drooling at the mere sound of the bell,
Yeah.
even without the food. It proved we learned to associate things and respond accordingly. Think about like your morning coffee routine. The smell, the sounds, all become cues that signal your brain, wake up.
So we're basically walking collections of learned associations.
In a way, yeah.
Okay, so what about operant conditioning? Is that similar?
It's kind of like the flip side.
Okay.
Operant conditioning, championed by B.F. Skinner, focuses on how the consequences of our actions shape us. Remember that feeling of accomplishment when you finally nail a difficult task?
Oh, yeah.
That's positive reinforcement, making
Mhm.
you more likely to repeat the behavior.
Right. It's like training a pet. A treat for doing a trick reinforces good behavior, just like acing a test motivates you to study harder next time.
Exactly.
But behaviorism feels very focused on the external. What about those inner workings of the mind? That's where cognitive psychology comes in, right?
Exactly. Cognitive psychology kind of shifted the spotlight inward, exploring those mental processes that drive our actions, how we perceive information, store memories, and solve problems.
Like peeking behind the curtain of the black box of the mind.
Yeah, exactly. And it gets even cooler when you consider things like cognitive neuropsychology.
Oh, yeah.
For example, it helped validate the distinction between short-term and long-term memory.
Mhm.
And with tools like fMRI, we can actually see brain activity in real time.
Okay, that is just plain awesome. Speaking of cool, you mentioned evolutionary psychology earlier. What's the elevator pitch for that approach?
Evolutionary psychology views our behavior through the lens of natural selection, how certain traits helped our ancestors survive and pass those traits down.
Okay.
For example, have you ever wondered, like, why the human brain got so big?
Yeah.
It's a key adaptation.
Wait, so our brains actually evolved to be bigger.
They did.
That sounds like a whole other deep dive.
Oh, it definitely is. Millions of years ago, our ancestors had much smaller brains. Over time, that increase in brain size gave humans a huge advantage. We became better problem solvers, better at communication, all the things that helped us thrive.
So our big brains are a product of evolution.
Mm-hmm.
That's seriously mind-blowing. Okay, let's talk about intelligence. When we talk about being smart, we often throw around the term IQ. What does that really mean?
IQ, or intelligence quotient, is a measure of general intelligence. It's assessed through those standardized tests you might have taken in school, designed to evaluate things like your reasoning, memory, and problem-solving skills.
Right, and I remember those results being plotted on that infamous bell curve. Does that ring a bell for you?
It certainly does. The bell curve shows how IQ scores are distributed, with the average hovering right around 100.
Okay.
Most people fall within like the 85 to 115 range.
Gotcha.
But the big question is, what shapes our intelligence in the first place?
Right.
Is it nature, nurture, or a bit of both?
It's the classic debate. My money's on both playing a role, but, your sources, particularly those twin studies, really solidified that. Tell me more.
Twin studies are fascinating.
Yeah.
Identical twins share 100% of their genes,
Right.
while fraternal twins share about 50%.
Okay.
Studies consistently show that identical twins raised in different environments still have more similar IQs than fraternal twins raised together.
Wow.
That points to a strong genetic component.
Okay, so genes lay the groundwork, but
Yeah.
you're saying our environment also plays a pretty crucial role.
Absolutely. Access to quality education, nutrition, even stimulating experiences, they all significantly impact cognitive development.
Right, it's like having fertile ground for those genetic seeds to flourish.
That's a great analogy.
That makes sense. Speaking of fertile ground, I came across a study by Turkheimer that really made me think.
Oh, yeah.
It found that the impact of genes on intelligence can actually vary based on socioeconomic status.
That's a fascinating one. It showed that genes mattered more for kids in affluent families,
Mm-hmm.
but in impoverished families, the environment had a much stronger influence. It's like a less supportive environment creates more variability, allowing the impact of those environmental factors to really shine through.
So creating a nurturing and enriching environment can actually level the playing field, regardless of genetic predisposition.
Precisely.
That's a powerful message, especially when thinking about education and access to resources. Okay, next up on our psychological journey, personality. It's what makes each of us unique, but how do we even define and measure something as complex as personality?
Personality is all about those enduring patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that make you, well, you.
Yeah.
Psychologists use all sorts of methods to measure these traits, from questionnaires to observing people in different situations.
I can imagine those personality quizzes you see online. Some seem pretty spot on, while others are a bit
Yeah.
questionable.
Right.
What makes a good personality questionnaire?
Reliability and validity are key.
Okay.
Reliability ensures you get consistent results.
Okay.
So, like, taking the same test twice should yield similar scores.
Got
Validity is all about making sure the test actually measures what it claims to. Are we truly capturing those core personality traits?
It makes sense you wouldn't want a personality test that's as reliable as a mood ring.
Exactly.
Okay, so are there any particular models that psychologists use to break down these traits?
Oh, absolutely. One influential model is Hans Eysenck's three-factor model.
Okay.
It focuses on extroversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism,
Okay.
those like core dimensions of personality.
So if someone is like super outgoing and loves being the life of the party, we might say they're high in extroversion, right?
Exactly.
While someone who's prone to anxiety or worry might score higher in neuroticism.
You got it.
Yeah.
Eysenck even believed these traits had a biological basis linked to our nervous systems.
Oh, wow.
But there's another model that's even more widely used today,
Uh.
the Big Five.
The big five, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Can you refresh our memory on those 5 traits?
Think ocean: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Right.
It's like a map of your core personality dimensions.
Okay.
For example, someone high in conscientiousness might be incredibly organized and responsible. Think like the person who always aced their homework.
Right, and someone high in openness might be the adventurous friend who's always dragging you to try new things.
You got
But it goes beyond these basic traits, right?
Mhm.
Your sources highlight Bandura's social cognitive theory.
That's right.
And,
Bandura emphasized that our thoughts and beliefs also play a powerful role in shaping who we are.
okay.
One key concept from his work is self-efficacy, the belief in your ability to succeed in specific situations.
That makes so much sense. If
Yeah.
you believe you could do something, you're more likely to put in the effort and, hopefully achieve your goals.
Right.
It's like having that inner cheerleader rooting for you.
Exactly. It's a game changer. And it shows that our mindset, those thoughts and beliefs, can have a huge impact on our lives.
Okay, we've covered intelligence, personality, the building blocks of who we are.
Yeah.
Now, how do these things develop over time? I'm particularly intrigued by Jean Piaget's stage theory of cognitive development.
Oh, yeah.
What's the crash course version?
Piaget was a revolutionary.
Okay.
He proposed that children go through, distinct stages of cognitive development, each with its own unique way of thinking and understanding the world. It's like leveling up in a video game.
Oh, I like that.
Each stage unlocks new abilities and perspectives.
Okay, I'm ready to level up. What are these stages all about?
The first is the sensoromotor stage, from birth to around 2 years old.
Okay.
Infants learn about the world through their senses and actions. Think like lots of grabbing, tasting, and exploring.
Okay.
This is where they develop object permanence, that mind-blowing realization that things still exist even when they can't see them.
It's amazing how babies go from being, completely in the moment to realizing that the world exists beyond their immediate senses.
Yeah.
But, this makes me think about how, even as adults, we sometimes struggle with object permanence in our own lives.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah.
We might know, logically, that things continue to exist even when we can't see them.
Yeah.
But emotionally, we sometimes react as if they've, disappeared.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Out of sight, out of mind, as they say.
Exactly.
So, what happens after that sensor motor stage? Do those little ones get any less self-centered?
Well, that brings us to the pre-operational stage, roughly from ages 2 to 7.
Okay.
This is where symbolic thought blossoms. Kids start using language and symbols to represent ideas. They love pretending, and their imaginations run wild.
Yeah.
But there's a catch.
Oh, no.
They're still quite egocentric.
Ah, yes. The "it's all about me" phase. Doesn't Piaget have that famous experiment with the mountains that illustrates this perfectly?
He does. In the Three Mountains task, a child views a model of 3 mountains from one side and then has to describe what a doll sitting on the opposite side would see.
Yeah.
Pre-operational kids often struggle with this, describing the scene from their own perspective.
It's like they think everyone sees the world exactly as they do. I bet this explains why sharing can be such a challenge at this age.
Exactly. It's all about understanding that other people have different perspectives.
Right.
And that can be a tough concept for little ones to grasp.
Of course. But here's where things get really interesting. A study by McGarrigle and Donaldson challenged Piaget's findings a bit.
Oh, really?
They found that context can dramatically impact a child's understanding.
Okay.
They introduced a naughty teddy bear who accidentally changed the arrangement of objects during a conservation task.
Oh.
Suddenly, the kids were much more likely to understand that the quantity hadn't actually changed, even though the appearance was different.
That's fascinating.
It's like the teddy bear provided a relatable narrative that helped them make sense of the situation.
Yeah.
It goes to show you, even little kids can understand complex ideas.
Yeah.
But it's all about how you present the information.
Right.
What about the later stages?
Well, from ages 7 to 11, we have the concrete operational stage where logical thinking takes center stage.
Okay.
Kids become masters of problem solving, understanding concepts like conservation and reversibility. But abstract thought is still a work in progress.
So they're getting those foundational logic skills down pat, but they're not quite ready to ponder the meaning of life.
Not quite. That comes later in the formal operational stage, which kicks in around age 12 and continues into adulthood. This is where abstract thinking, hypothetical reasoning, and deductive logic really take flight.
So this is where we start seeing those higher-level thinking skills that are so crucial for things like scientific reasoning, critical analysis, and forming our own moral compass.
Precisely. It's like graduating from concrete thinking to a world of possibilities and abstract concepts.
Okay, time to shift gears a bit and talk about something that can sometimes feel, well, abnormal. Your sources dive into the question of what is abnormality. That feels like a slippery slope to define.
It definitely is. There's no, one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
One approach is to consider what deviates significantly from social norms.
Okay.
But of course, those norms can change drastically across cultures and over time.
That's so true. What's considered weird in one culture might be perfectly normal in another.
Exactly.
It reminds me of the concept of culture-bound syndromes, disorders that are specific to certain cultures.
Oh.
We talked about Down syndrome, but there's also Coro, where people fear their genitals are retracting.
Wow.
Or pip block talk, and Arctic hysteria with wild outbursts of shouting and running naked.
Oh my
I
God.
know, right?
Yeah,
Cultural context is so crucial.
it is.
But in Western psychology, the DSM, or Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, reigns supreme for diagnosing mental disorders. It's like a comprehensive catalog of mental health
Right.
conditions. But even that has its limitations.
Of course.
So it's a helpful tool, but it's not perfect. What are some of the issues with this kind of categorical approach to diagnosis?
The biggest criticism is that the DSM is very black and white. You either have a disorder or you don't. But
Right.
mental health is much more nuanced than that.
Of course.
It's a spectrum.
Yeah.
And sometimes those lines get blurry. Plus, what's abnormal in one culture might be totally fine in another.
That's such an important point. It's a reminder that diagnosis is complex, and we need to approach it with both sensitivity and cultural awareness. Now, what about the causes of mental disorders? Is it purely biological, or do our experiences play a role?
It's rarely ever a simple answer. The diathesis stress model provides a really helpful framework for understanding how vulnerability and triggering events interact.
Okay, break that down for me. What exactly is diathesis?
Diathesis is like a predisposition or vulnerability,
Okay.
a weak spot, if you will.
Okay.
This could stem from genetics, early childhood experiences, even personality traits.
Oh.
Stress refers to those environmental or life events that can act as a trigger.
So it's like having a genetic predisposition to anxiety,
Hmm.
but it might not actually develop unless you experience a major stressor like a job loss or a traumatic event.
That's the idea. Both diathesis and stress need to be present for a disorder to fully manifest.
Makes sense. And it reminds me of that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Okay.
But maybe it also leaves you a little more vulnerable in certain areas.
That's a great point. We carry our experiences with us, both the good and the bad,
Right.
and they shape who we are.
Okay, we've laid some groundwork. Now I'm itching to dig deeper into specific conditions like anxiety and depression, and I know you have some fascinating research on those. What's next on our psychological adventure?
Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? This whole idea that we're shaped by this delicate dance between what we're born with and what we encounter in life.
It's like those nature documentaries where a tiny sprout has to push through cracks in the pavement to survive.
Oh, yeah.
Both its inherent resilience and the environment play a role in whether it flourishes.
Right.
We talked about genetic factors being a potential diathesis.
Hmm.
But what other things can make us vulnerable?
Well, early childhood experiences can leave a deep imprint.
Okay.
Trauma, neglect, even insecure attachments in those crucial early years,
Yeah.
they can create vulnerabilities that ripple through a person's life,
Yeah.
making them more susceptible to mental health challenges.
That makes sense. Those early years are when our brains are developing most rapidly, forming those crucial connections that shape our emotional and social well-being.
Exactly. And just like those early experiences, our personality traits can also play a role in diathesis.
Okay.
Remember the big five?
Yeah.
Well, imagine someone high in neuroticism, prone to experiencing negative emotions more intensely.
Right.
They might be more susceptible to anxiety or depression when life throws those curveballs.
It's like they have a lower threshold for stress, so it takes less to tip the scales and trigger those negative feelings.
That's a great way to put it. Now let's flip the script and look at the stress side of the equation.
Okay.
What are some of those big stressors that can push someone toward those mental health tipping points?
Well, we've talked about major life events,
Mm-hmm.
job loss, death of a loved one. Those are biggies. But I have a feeling there's more to the stress story.
Absolutely. Don't underestimate those daily hassles.
Yeah, no,
Traffic jams, deadlines, disagreements with loved ones. They might seem small on their own,
yeah.
but that constant drip, drip, drip of everyday stress can wear down our resilience and increase our risk for mental health struggles.
It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Those tiny annoyances, they add up.
Exactly.
But speaking of stress, I want to circle back to social anxiety.
Okay.
We touched on those cognitive factors.
Mm-hmm.
But your sources also pointed to some fascinating research on the role of genetics and temperament.
It's true. Twin studies suggest genetics play a role,
Huh.
just like in other mental health conditions.
Okay.
If social anxiety runs in your family, you might be more predisposed to it yourself.
Right.
And then there's temperament.
Okay.
Those innate tendencies we're born with.
Yeah.
Some infants are naturally more sensitive, reactive, or inhibited,
Okay.
and these differences can influence how they approach social situations.
So those early differences in how we react to the world
Hmm.
can set the stage for how we navigate social situations throughout life.
Yeah.
It makes me think about the importance of creating supportive environments for those sensitive little ones so they
Yeah.
feel safe to explore and build their confidence.
Absolutely. Early intervention is key.
Like that.
Now, we talked about how effective cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, can be for treating social anxiety.
Uh-huh.
Can we unpack that a little more?
Yes, please. CBT has always sounded a bit mysterious to me.
It's actually very practical.
Yeah.
CBT for social anxiety often involves cognitive restructuring,
Okay.
helping people identify and challenge those negative thoughts and beliefs um, about social situations. Like
Okay.
replacing those "I'm going to mess this up" thoughts with more balanced and realistic
Right.
ones.
So instead of assuming that everyone's judging them, they learn to reframe those thoughts
Yeah.
and focus on the positive aspects of social interaction.
Precisely. But it's not just about changing thoughts, right?
Right.
There's also that exposure element.
Yeah, exposure therapy.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Exposure therapy is like dipping your toes into the social pool gradually.
Okay.
Start with like smaller, less intimidating interactions,
Okay.
and slowly work your way up to those more challenging situations.
Okay.
The key is to show yourself that your anxiety is manageable
Right.
and that those catastrophic outcomes you fear rarely, if ever, come true.
It's like facing your fears one baby step at a time and realizing that you're stronger than you thought.
You got it.
I like that.
And speaking of untangling the roles of genes and environment, your source has highlighted another area where those twin studies have been super helpful:
Okay.
aggression.
Aggression. That's a loaded topic.
It is.
But I'm curious to hear what the research has to say. Is there a biological basis for aggressive behavior?
Well, twin studies have consistently shown that genetics contribute to individual differences in aggression.
Okay.
Identical twins tend to be more similar in their levels of aggression than fraternal twins,
Okay.
even when raised apart.
Wow. So our genes might influence how quick we are to anger or how we handle frustration.
It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
But remember, it's never just one factor.
Right.
Environment plays a huge role as well.
Of course. Think about those nature versus nurture documentaries where they show how kids raised in chaotic or abusive environments are more likely to exhibit aggressive behavior.
Exactly. Those early experiences can leave a lasting mark on our emotional and behavioral development.
So speaking of nature and nurture, what about the link between testosterone and aggression? I feel like that's a stereotype that gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
Is there any truth to it?
Well, studies have shown that men with higher testosterone levels tend to be more physically aggressive and impulsive.
Uh-huh.
So there might be a biological basis there.
But it's not as simple as saying, like, high testosterone equals raging beast, right?
It's definitely not. Remember, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Right.
There are so many other factors that could be at play: social expectations, cultural norms, even those learned behaviors we pick up from our environment.
Yeah, it's like saying everyone with a driver's license is a reckless driver.
Right.
There are plenty of responsible drivers out there.
Exactly.
Okay, your sources also mentioned this fascinating theory called the frustration-aggression hypothesis. I have a feeling I'm going to relate to this one.
I think we all can.
Yeah.
This hypothesis, proposed way back in 1939, suggests that frustration, the blocking of goal-directed behavior, always leads to aggression. Okay. So you're stuck in traffic, you're late for a meeting.
Yeah.
That frustration is going to bubble up and express itself as aggression, like honking your horn or yelling at other drivers.
Oh, I've been there. But I also know that I don't always lash out when I'm frustrated. Sometimes I just take a deep breath and, like, try to find a detour.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
While frustration is definitely a potent trigger,
Yeah.
it doesn't always lead to an aggressive outburst.
No.
Other factors come into play.
Like what?
Our temperament, how we interpret the situation, even the social context.
Right. So someone with a more laid-back personality might be better at managing their frustration.
Mm-hmm.
And someone who's surrounded by supportive friends might be less likely to lash out.
Exactly. And how we interpret the situation matters too.
Okay.
If we perceive the frustration as intentional or unfair, we're more likely to see red and react aggressively.
It's like those moments when you think someone is deliberately trying to annoy you.
Right.
That's when things can really escalate.
Exactly. So it's not just about the frustration itself, but about those thoughts and beliefs we layer on top of it.
Right. That makes sense.
Now, there's another model that builds on this idea, the general aggression model.
Okay.
It provides a a more comprehensive framework for understanding those complex factors that contribute to aggression.
Okay, I'm ready for a crash course in the general aggression model.
Okay, great. It suggests aggression is the result of this intricate interplay of personal and situational factors. On the personal side, you've got personality traits, beliefs, and attitudes.
Wow.
For example, someone with a hostile attribution bias,
Hmm.
they might be more likely to interpret ambiguous actions as aggressive
Right.
and respond in kind.
Yeah, it's like assuming everyone's out to get them.
Exactly. And then there are those situational cues,
Okay.
things in our environment that can trigger those aggressive responses.
Okay.
Think like extreme heat, loud noises, even the presence of weapons.
Oh, yeah, I can definitely see how those things could make anyone feel on edge and more likely to lash out.
Absolutely. Those cues can activate aggressive thoughts and feelings,
Mhm.
making us more sensitive to provocation
Right.
and even misinterpreting harmless actions as threats.
Like those cues prime our brains for aggression, setting the stage for conflict.
Exactly. The general aggression model also emphasizes the importance of those cognitive processes,
Right, yeah.
how we interpret and appraise the situation. It's not just about those knee-jerk reactions, but about how our thoughts and beliefs shape our responses.
It's a reminder that we have more control over our behavior than we sometimes think.
Right.
We can choose to pause, take a breath, and reframe our thoughts before reacting aggressively.
Exactly. And those skills, emotional regulation and conflict resolution, are things we can teach and learn.
That's hopeful.
Yeah.
Okay, from aggression to morality, talk about a shift. Your sources highlight the work of Lawrence Kohlberg and his stage theory of moral development.
Oh. Yeah.
Brian, what's the gist of his theory?
Kohlberg, much like Piaget, believed that we go through distinct stages of moral reasoning as we mature.
Okay.
He identified three main levels: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional.
Those sound intriguing. Let's break them down.
Okay. Pre-conventional morality, which you typically see in young children,
Okay.
is all about self-interest and avoiding punishment.
Oh.
They follow rules to avoid getting in trouble or to get those sweet rewards.
Right, it makes sense. It's the what's in it for me stage of moral reasoning.
Exactly.
What happens next?
As kids enter late childhood and early adolescence, they transition to conventional morality.
Okay.
They start internalizing those societal rules and expectations, focusing on gaining approval from others and maintaining social order.
So it's about fitting in and being a good citizen,
Yeah.
even if they might not fully agree with all the rules.
Exactly. They're concerned with living up to those expectations
Yes,
and upholding those values they've learned from their family and community.
Gotcha. And then there's that final level. Post-conventional morality, what's that all about?
Post-conventional morality is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
This is when individuals develop their own ethical principles that might even transcend societal norms.
Oh, yeah.
They're thinking about universal principles of justice, fairness, human rights,
Wow.
even if those ideals clash with the laws or customs of their society.
So they're not just following the rules blindly, they're questioning them and forming their own moral compass based on, deeper principles.
Exactly.
That's pretty impressive,
Yeah,
but I imagine not everyone reaches that level.
you're right. Kohlberg believed that reaching the post-conventional level is relatively rare.
Yeah.
It requires a high degree of cognitive maturity and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
It's like reaching the top of the moral mountain.
That's a good way to put it.
But your sources also point out that morality isn't just about, cold, hard reasoning, right?
Absolutely. While Kohlberg focused on the cognitive side, other researchers have emphasized the importance of those gut feelings.
Our emotions.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I can definitely see how emotions play a role. Like, when you see someone being treated unfairly, that sense of injustice can be a powerful motivator to speak up or take action.
Exactly. Emotions like empathy, guilt, and shame are potent drivers of moral behavior.
Right.
They can guide us toward ethical choices and help us live in alignment with our values.
It's like those emotions act as a moral compass, pointing us in the right direction. But I'm also thinking about how those social factors you mentioned earlier, our relationships, cultural norms, even our upbringing, they all play a role in shaping our morals as well.
Absolutely. Think about parenting styles.
Okay.
Those who use inductive discipline,
Okay.
explaining the why behind the rules and emphasizing the impact of actions on others, tend to foster higher levels of moral reasoning in their kids.
It's not just about blindly obeying, but about understanding those underlying principles.
Exactly.
It's like teaching kids to think for themselves and develop their own moral compass.
Precisely. And creating that supportive and nurturing environment where kids feel safe to explore moral dilemmas and learn from their mistakes, that's crucial for healthy moral development.
That's a good point. Okay, from morals to something a bit more personal, gender.
Oh, okay.
It's a topic that's constantly evolving, and your sources highlight the concept of gender identity, which feels much more nuanced than just biological sex.
It is.
Uh,
Gender identity is that deep-seated internal sense of ourselves as male, female, or somewhere in between.
okay.
It's shaped by a complex web of biology, psychology, and social influences.
So it's not just about our chromosomes, but about how we feel and how we express ourselves in terms of gender.
Exactly.
And this is separate from sexual orientation, right?
That's right. Gender identity is about who we are,
Okay.
while sexual orientation is about who we're attracted to.
Gotcha. Two distinct, equally important aspects of ourselves.
Exactly.
And your sources point out that gender identity starts developing early in life,
Uh-huh.
often shaped by those social factors we've been talking about,
Yeah.
gender roles and stereotypes.
Absolutely.
So tell me more about those.
Gender roles are those societal expectations about how males and females should behave.
Okay.
Those unwritten rules about what's considered masculine or feminine.
So it's like those societal scripts that tell us boys should be tough and girls should be nurturing,
Exactly.
even though those are just narrow slices of the human experience.
You got it. And gender stereotypes are those overgeneralized beliefs about the characteristics of each gender.
Okay.
Like men being better at math or women being more emotional.
Right.
These stereotypes can be incredibly harmful
Oh, yeah?
because they limit our understanding of individuals
Okay.
and reinforce those rigid gender norms.
Right. It's like trying to squeeze everyone into these like tiny predefined boxes
Yeah.
instead of recognizing the incredible diversity and complexity of human experience.
Exactly. And the scary part is that kids are exposed to these stereotypes from a very young age.
Right.
They see them in their families, in the media, even in their interactions with other kids.
It's like they're constantly bombarded with messages about how they're supposed to act based on their gender. But don't kids also play an active role in shaping their own understanding of gender? Your sources talk about this idea of self-socialization.
That's a great point. Self-socialization theory says that kids aren't just like passively absorbing these messages.
Uh-huh.
They're observing, interpreting, and internalizing information about gender and using it to construct their own sense of self.
So it's like they're little detectives gathering clues about gender from their environment and piecing together their own unique understanding.
Exactly. They're actively engaged in shaping their own identities.
I like that.
It's not just about what adults are telling them, but about how they're making sense of the world,
Right.
figuring out where they fit in.
Okay, we've talked about how those social factors, along with those biological and temperamental differences, can influence how kids understand gender.
Right.
But now I want to tackle the elephant in the room. The question of whether there are innate psychological differences between males and females. Your sources present some contrasting viewpoints on this.
It's a debate that's been raging for ages.
It has.
You've got folks like John Gray, who famously wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus,
Oh, yeah.
arguing that men and women are fundamentally wired differently, leading to distinct ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving.
Okay, so he's saying we're basically different species from different planets.
Yeah.
But your sources also mention Janet Hyde and her gender similarities hypothesis.
Right.
What's her take on this?
Hyde's hypothesis throws down the gauntlet, stating that males and females are more alike than they are different
Okay.
when it comes to most psychological variables.
So she's saying we have more common ground than those Mars and Venus folks would have us believe.
Exactly. And that's where those meta-analyses come in.
Okay.
Studies that combine data from like hundreds of other studies to get a bigger picture.
Gotcha.
Your sources mention a massive meta-analysis by Zell and colleagues. Okay.
That looked at gender differences across a huge range of psychological traits.
Okay, spill the tea. What did they find?
They found that most gender differences were like small
Okay.
or even very small.
Wow.
We're talking tiny discrepancies when you look at the big picture.
Okay.
This lends a lot of support to Hyde's gender similarities hypothesis.
So the differences between men and women, on average, are pretty subtle. It's a good reminder that we shouldn't get too caught up in those stereotypes and generalizations.
Exactly. Even when statistically significant differences are found,
Hmm.
there's still a ton of overlap between the sexes.
Right.
It's not like all men fall into one neat category and all women into another.
It's like saying all dogs are aggressive just because a few breeds have a reputation for being protective.
Exactly.
Okay. But I'm guessing there are a few areas where researchers have found more noticeable differences.
You're right. One area is spatial abilities.
That's our ability to mentally manipulate objects in space, like reading maps or visualizing three-dimensional objects.
So there's some truth to that stereotype about men being better at navigating and assembling furniture.
There might be. On average, males tend to outperform females on special tasks.
Okay.
But even then, there's a lot of overlap.
Right.
And plenty of women excel in those areas.
Right. It's all about individual differences, not sweeping generalization.
Precisely.
Now, I'm guessing aggression is another area where we see some noticeable differences.
You guessed it.
Mm.
Meta-analyses have shown that males, on average, tend to be more physically aggressive than females.
Right. So there might be some support for those biological arguments about testosterone playing a role.
It's possible.
Yeah.
But let's not forget those social and cultural influences we talked about.
Of course.
Boys are often encouraged to be more assertive and physically active,
Right.
while girls might be socialized to be more passive and avoid conflict.
Right. It's like that old saying, boys will be boys.
Yeah.
But maybe it's more about how we raise and socialize them.
Exactly.
Okay. So overall, the gender differences in most psychological traits are pretty small, but there are a few areas where more noticeable differences have been observed.
That's a great summary. It really highlights the importance of taking a nuanced approach to understanding gender.
I agree.
We need to be mindful of those average differences,
Uh-huh.
but also recognize the vast individual variation that exists within each gender.
Right.
We're all unique individuals, and we should be celebrated for our differences.
Well said. Now, your sources mention a fascinating condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH.
Oh, yeah.
What is that, and how does it shed light on gender development?
CAH is a genetic disorder that affects the adrenal glands,
Okay.
causing them to overproduce androgens, those male sex hormones.
Okay.
Even female fetuses with CAH are exposed to higher levels of androgens in the womb, and this can have a big impact on their development.
Oh, wow. So those hormonal differences during those crucial prenatal stages can actually shape their gender identity and expression.
Exactly. Girls with CAH often have masculinized genitalia at birth,
Right.
and they might exhibit more masculine play preferences and behaviors throughout childhood.
So they might be drawn to those toys and activities that are typically associated with boys, even if they're raised as girls.
That's right. And research suggests that girls with CAH are also more likely to identify as lesbian or bisexual later in life.
Really? That's fascinating.
It is.
It really underscores the complex interplay of biology and environment in shaping our identities.
Yeah.
It's not an either situation.
Yeah.
It's this beautiful, intricate dance between nature and nurture.
Exactly. And speaking of nature and nurture, let's talk about attachment.
Okay.
That fundamental bond between a child and their caregiver.
Yes. Your sources highlight the groundbreaking work of John Bowlby,
Oh, yes.
who developed attachment theory. What's the key takeaway from his work?
Bowlby argued that infants are hardwired to form attachments to their caregivers.
Okay.
It's not just about those basic needs like food and shelter.
Right.
It's about an innate drive for emotional connection and security.
It's like we're programmed to seek out those loving, protective bonds that help us feel safe and secure in the world.
Exactly. And these early attachment patterns, Bowlby believed, can lay the groundwork for our relationships throughout life.
Oh, wow.
How we connect with romantic partners, friends, even our own children.
Wow, that's a powerful legacy. So how do researchers actually study these early attachment patterns? Your sources mention something they call the strange situation. That sounds a bit ominous.
Don't worry, no babies are harmed in this strange situation.
Okay.
It's a laboratory procedure developed by Mary Ainsworth to assess attachment styles in infants.
Okay.
It's like a little social experiment that observes how babies react to separations and reunions with their caregivers in a controlled setting.
Okay, walk me through it. What happens exactly?
Picture a playroom. A baby and their caregiver are hanging out. exploring the toys.
Okay.
Then the caregiver leaves the room for a short period,
Uh-huh.
and a stranger enters.
Oh,
The researchers observe how the baby reacts to the caregiver's departure and return,
hmm.
as well as their interactions with the stranger.
It's like a tiny soap opera designed to elicit those attachment behaviors. And based on those observations, researchers have identified different attachment styles.
That's right. Ainsworth and her colleagues identified three main styles: secure, avoidant, and resistant.
Okay.
Securely attached infants use their caregivers as a secure base to explore.
Okay.
They might get upset when the caregiver leaves,
Right.
but they're easily soothed upon their return.
Okay, so it's like they trust that their caregiver will always be there for them, like
Yeah.
a safe haven they can return to. What about avoidant infants?
Avoidant infants tend to show less distress when their caregiver leaves, and might even avoid contact with them upon their return.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I wonder if they've just learned that seeking comfort leads to disappointment. So they've shut down that need.
That's a really interesting thought.
Yeah.
And what about resistant infants?
Yeah, what about them?
Resistant infants are a bit more of a mixed bag.
Okay.
They get super distressed when their caregiver leaves
Yeah,
and might cling to them desperately upon their return,
right.
but they might also resist their caregiver's attempts to soothe them,
Okay.
showing both clinginess and anger.
It's like they're torn between wanting closeness and pushing it away.
Yeah.
Maybe because they've experienced inconsistent caregiving in the past and aren't sure what to expect.
That's a great insight. These different attachment styles reflect the quality of that parent-child bond.
Okay.
Those securely attached infants typically have caregivers who are responsive and consistently attuned to their needs.
While those avoidant and resistant patterns might suggest a less reliable or emotionally available caregiver.
Exactly. And these early attachment styles can have a ripple effect,
Okay.
influencing our social and emotional development throughout life.
So securely attached individuals might have an easier time forming healthy relationships and regulating their emotions,
Right.
while those with insecure attachments might struggle with trust, intimacy, or managing those big feelings.
That's what the research suggests. It really underscores how those early relationships lay the groundwork for our social and emotional well-being throughout life.
It's like those early attachments provide a blueprint for how we navigate the world and connect with others.
That's a great analogy. We carry those early experiences with us, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
But the good news is,
Yeah.
even if we had less than ideal attachment experiences early on,
Right.
there's always room for growth and healing.
That's such an important message. We're not doomed by our past. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from intelligence and personality to development and attachment.
It's been an incredible journey exploring these foundational pieces of the human puzzle.
It really has.
And it's a testament to the power of psychology to illuminate those complexities of human nature.
Absolutely. But our journey isn't over yet.
Oh.
There's one more fascinating realm we need to explore, the world of social psychology. How do our interactions with others shape who we are and how we behave? Stay tuned. We'll be back to tackle that question after a quick break. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our epic psychology journey with a grand finale, the fascinating world of social psychology. Get ready to uncover those hidden social forces that shape how we interact with others, because things are about to get very interesting.
Social psychology really is like cracking the code of human interaction, you know? It's all about understanding how our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are influenced by other people, whether they're physically present or just lurking in the back of our minds.
It's like that saying, we're all just actors on a stage. But in this case, the stage is our social world, and the script is constantly being rewritten based on who we're interacting with. Okay, let's start with the basics. Your sources mentioned this concept of person perception. What's that all about?
Person perception is basically how we size people up. It's the process of forming impressions of others, trying to decipher their motives, personality traits, and intentions.
It makes you wonder if we all have secret files on each other, like in those spy movies. But seriously, it's amazing how quickly we can form those impressions, even from just a glance or a few words. What are some of the factors that influence those snap judgments?
Well, physical appearance plays a surprisingly big role.
Oh, yeah.
We're wired to make judgments about people's character based on their looks, even though we know we shouldn't judge a book by its cover.
It's like that halo effect. where we assume attractive people are also more intelligent, trustworthy, and all-around awesome. I know I've fallen into that trap before.
We all have. Those stereotypes are so powerful. But of course, appearances can be deceiving. And it's important to remember that beauty is only skin deep.
Right, there's so much more to a person than what meets the eye. Now, what about, like, the information we gather about people? Does that shape our perceptions, too?
Absolutely. If someone tells you their friend is hilarious and super outgoing, you're likely to have a positive impression of that person before you even meet them.
It's like those preconceived notions we form based on hearsay. But here's the thing. What happens when those initial impressions are wrong? Can we ever truly shake them off?
That's the tricky part. Those first impressions can be surprisingly sticky, even when we encounter contradictory information later on. It's like those initial impressions create this mental filter that colors how we interpret everything else about that person.
It's like we're trying to fit all the new information into that pre-existing box, even if it doesn't quite fit. Your sources highlight a classic study by Solomon Asch that really illustrates the power of those first impressions.
Oh, Ash's study was brilliant.
Yeah,
He gave participants a list of traits describing a hypothetical person.
okay,
The only difference between the lists was one word, either warm or cold.
okay.
Participants who saw the warm list rated the person way more positively than those who saw the cold list, even though all the other traits were identical.
Wow, that's wild.
Hmm.
One word can make such a difference. It really highlights the power of language and how those initial impressions can color our entire perception of someone. Now, let's talk about attributions. That's how we explain the causes of people's behavior, right?
Exactly. Attribution theory suggests we're constantly trying to figure out why people do what they do. Are they acting out of character, or is it just the situation they're in?
Right.
Are they inherently good or bad, or are they just having a bad day?
It's like that classic dilemma when someone cuts you off in traffic. Do you assume they're a jerk, or do you consider that maybe they're rushing to the hospital or dealing with some kind of an emergency?
That's a perfect example. And those attributions we make can drastically impact how we feel about that person and how we react to their behavior. If you write them off as a jerk, you're more likely to respond with anger or aggression. But if you give them the benefit of the doubt, you might feel more empathy and understanding.
Right. It's a reminder that we all make mistakes, and sometimes people's behavior is more about their circumstances than their character. But let's be honest, we all have our biases, right? What are some of those common pitfalls when it comes to making attributions?
Oh, there are plenty. One of the biggest culprits is the fundamental attribution error. It's our tendency to overestimate the role of internal factors and underestimate those external factors when explaining other people's behavior.
So we're more likely to assume someone's actions reflect their personality, rather than considering those situational pressures they might be under.
Precisely. We jump to conclusions about people's motivations without fully considering the context of their actions.
It's like we forget that everyone's fighting their own battles and facing their own unique challenges. We could all use a little more grace and understanding.
Absolutely. And then there's the actor-observer bias. That's our sneaky tendency to attribute our own behavior to external factors, while attributing other people's behavior to internal factors.
So if I trip and fall, it's because the sidewalk was uneven. But if you trip and fall, it's because you're clumsy.
Exactly. We're much more forgiving of ourselves than we are of others. It's like we have this built-in self-serving bias that helps us protect our egos.
Well, at least we're good at rationalizing our own mishaps.
Ah!
Okay, let's move on to another fascinating concept. Conformity. I feel like we've all experienced those moments where we feel that pressure to fit in, even if we might disagree deep down.
Conformity is such a powerful force. It's the tendency to adjust our thoughts, feelings, or behaviors to match those of a group. We want to be accepted, to belong. And sometimes that means going along with the crowd, even if it means sacrificing our own individuality.
It's like that age-old dilemma.
Right.
Do you stand out and risk being ostracized, or do you blend in and maintain those social bonds?
But isn't there also a positive side to conformity? Like, if everyone's following the rules and behaving in a socially acceptable way, doesn't that create a sense of order and stability?
You're right. There are definitely benefits to conformity. It helps society function smoothly.
Right.
But the key is finding that balance between fitting in and staying true to yourself.
Yeah,
And sometimes conformity can lead us down a dangerous path.
makes sense. Speaking of dangerous paths, your sources mentioned that classic study by, wait for it, Solomon Asch again. This guy was prolific. What did he do this time?
Asch was a master of social experiments.
He was.
In this one, he had participants judge the length of lines. Super simple task, right?
Yeah.
but he planted actors in the group who intentionally gave the wrong answers. So the participants were faced with a choice: trust their own eyes or go along with the group's obviously incorrect judgment. What happened? Did anyone stand up for the truth?
The results were shocking. Over 75% of the participants conformed to the group's wrong answer at least once, even though they knew it was wrong.
Wow, that's incredible. It just shows how powerful that pressure to conform can be, even when we know we're right. We're social creatures, and we crave that acceptance, even if it means compromising our own judgment.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we're not always as rational and independent as we think we are. Those social forces can have a huge influence on our behavior.
Okay, let's talk about another powerful social force: obedience to authority.
Mm.
I have a feeling this one's going to get a little dark.
It can be. Obedience is all about complying with the commands of an authority figure,
Okay.
someone who holds power over us, like a boss, a teacher, or a police officer.
So it's different from conformity in that it's about following direct orders, not just going along with the group.
Exactly. And the most famous and controversial study on obedience was conducted by Stanley Milgram back in the 1960s.
Oh, yeah.
It's the one where participants were instructed to deliver electric shocks to a learner every time they made a mistake.
Right. The Milgram experiment is legendary. The shocks were fake, of course, but the participants believed they were real.
They did.
And the experimenter, that authority figure in the white coat, kept urging them to increase the voltage, even when the learner screamed in pain. It's seriously disturbing stuff.
It is. The results sent shockwaves through the psychology world. A majority of the participants obeyed those commands and delivered what they thought were potentially lethal shocks just because an authority figure told them to.
It's a chilling reminder that we're all capable of doing terrible things under the wrong circumstances, especially when we feel pressure from someone in a position of power.
It's a sobering thought. Milgram's study sparked a huge ethical debate about the limits of deception in research,
Of course.
but it also provided incredible insights into the psychology of obedience.
Right. It's like a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind obedience and the importance of questioning authority. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about bystander intervention. I feel like we've all seen those news stories where someone's in trouble and a crowd of people just stands there filming instead of helping. What's going on there?
It's called the bystander effect.
Okay.
It's the counterintuitive finding that the presence of others actually reduces the likelihood that any one person will help. The more witnesses there are, the less likely anyone is to intervene.
That's so bizarre. You'd think that more people would equal more help, but it's actually the opposite.
It's one of those weird quirks of human psychology. One explanation is diffusion of responsibility. When there are lots of witnesses, we feel less personal responsibility to act. We assume someone else will step up.
It's like that someone else will handle it mentality. We pass the buck even when someone's safety is at stake.
Exactly. And there's also that element of social influence. We look to others for cues about how to behave. If everyone else is just standing around, we might assume the situation isn't actually that serious.
It's like we get caught in this web of inaction. No one wants to be the one to overreact or make a fool of themselves. But what can we do to overcome this bystander effect and encourage more people to help?
Awareness is key. Just knowing about the bystander effect can make us more likely to act.
Okay.
And if you're ever in a situation where someone needs help, be direct. Single out someone in the crowd and ask for their help specifically.
Okay, so instead of just yelling help, I should point at someone and say, "You in the red hat, call 911."
Exactly. That direct appeal increases their sense of personal responsibility and makes it much harder to ignore the situation.
It's like taking away that anonymity and forcing them to make a choice to be a bystander or a helper. Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on one more important concept: pro-social behavior. It's like the antidote to the bystander effect.
It is. Pro-social behavior is all about those actions that benefit others or society as a whole. It's about being helpful, kind, and compassionate, from holding a door open for someone to donating to charity or even risking your life to save a stranger.
It's like those heartwarming stories that restore your faith in humanity. But what motivates people to be so selfless?
Empathy plays a huge role. The more we can connect with and understand the feelings of others, the more likely we are to act compassionately.
It's like putting yourself in their shoes and feeling their pain or joy as if it were your own. And your sources also mention altruism, which feels like the ultimate expression of pro-social behavior.
Altruism is that truly selfless act, helping others even when it comes at a cost to yourself, with no expectation of reward or recognition. It's like jumping into a raging river to save someone, even though you're not a strong swimmer, and risk drowning yourself.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like those stories of everyday heroes who risk their own safety to help others. What motivates people to act so selfless?
It's a complex question. Some believe it's about our upbringing and the values we're instilled with. If we're raised in a caring and compassionate environment, we're more likely to internalize those values and act accordingly. Others point to personality. Some people are just naturally more empathetic and altruistic.
So it's like some people are just wired for kindness. But your sources also mention an evolutionary perspective on altruism, which is a bit counterintuitive, isn't it? How can helping others, even at our own expense, be beneficial from an evolutionary standpoint?
It's a fascinating paradox. Evolutionary psychologists argue that even seemingly selfless acts can ultimately benefit our survival and reproductive success. One explanation is kin selection. We're more likely to help those who are genetically related to us, even if it means putting ourselves at risk because it increases the chances of our shared genes being passed on.
So it's like that fierce protective instinct we have for our family members. We'll do anything to ensure their survival, even if it means sacrificing our own.
Exactly. And then there's reciprocal altruism, the idea that we might help someone today, even if it's costly, because we anticipate that they might help us in return in the future.
It's like we're investing in our social networks, building up that goodwill that might benefit us later on.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even the most seemingly selfless acts can have those hidden benefits that contribute to our survival and success as a species. We're all interconnected, and helping others can ultimately benefit us all.
Well, folks, there you have it. We've journeyed through the vast and fascinating landscape of psychology, from those fundamental building blocks of intelligence and personality to the complex social forces that shape our interactions.
It really has been an incredible exploration, and it's such a testament to the power of psychology to help us understand ourselves, each other, and the world around us.
It's like we've gained a whole new set of lenses through which to view the human experience. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of psychology. And remember, the journey of self-discovery never truly ends. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.